Revenge films.
My name is Michelle Smith. I live with my husband Thomas and our 2 daughters. Normally, I work full-time as an employee at this company. I got along really well with the other employees, and the CEO was also a really great person. I loved my job and my office. However, there was just one person out of all of those great people that was a real pain. And that was my boss and department manager, Mr. Cunningham. Perhaps my boss never liked that the CEO had taken a liking to me from the beginning, because he had essentially made me his worst enemy. For example, even when I would submit all of my planning documents, he would say that he wouldn't accept my plan and my plan only. Or one day during the lunch break, he actually went into my computer and deleted all of the material that I was in the middle of creating for an important meeting. I can only think that the only person in the office that would do something like that would be Mr. Cunningham, because we didn't have any security cameras placed within the office. I didn't have any evidence to prove that it was him. I had no choice but to work overtime that day and stay late into the night so that I could turn it in within the day. On another time, when it came to the monthly review for that month, I was placed in last place out of all the employees in our department that month. That monthly review was something that directly affected our bonus, so it was a rating that all of the employees cared quite a lot about. Even though I tried to ask Mr. Cunningham about my rating and why it was so low, this was his response.
You didn't turn in your materials on time. And you also don't even know how to meet deadlines for your work. Obviously, someone like that is going to be rated at last place. All I did was give you the correct rating. What? Do you have some kind of complaint?
And he shot me down like this. I was so furious that I didn't know what to do, but this was the department manager after all, and it was difficult for me to say anything in response to him, and I was disappointed. But luckily for me, when the CEO saw that rating, he realized that something must be wrong, and he actually made the department manager redo the team rating. Thanks to that, I was able to receive the correct review and rating that reflected my abilities in the job. However, even after that, he continued with his dirty tactics against me like this. Even still, despite all of that, the reason why I was able to continue doing my job without paying much mind to it was because when I came home from work, my precious family would welcome me home with open arms, and also because my colleagues at work were all such great people. You don't need to worry about it. It's only because Mr. Cunningham is jealous of you that he treats you like this. And they all cheered me up. However, one day out of nowhere, I received a phone call from my father with some devastating news. He told me that my mother had cancer and she didn't have much time left to live. I was always very close to the both of my parents, and when I heard my father's words, I was so shocked and devastated that I couldn't contain my sadness. To be honest, he told me that they had heard from the doctor a while ago about the cancer, but my mom knew how hard I was working, and it was her choice that she didn't want to tell me all this time. I lived in town about 2 hours away by car from my family home, so I wasn't able to see my parents that often, and it would be impossible for me to go and visit my mother every day while she was hospitalized. Despite the distance, I really wanted to see my mother, even if only for a little bit. So I explained the situation to my CEO. When I did, the CEO was really empathetic and sad as if it was his own family. He told me that I can set aside my work for the time being and to go and be with my parents during this difficult time. I was really grateful for those words and I gladly accepted. And while still working full-time, I took some days off of work so that I could go and see my mother. Even though my mom was sick in the hospital, she was still the same mom that I loved, and she was doing her best to not make me worry about her. And that's why I also chose to speak to her normally, and I didn't want to make her worry either. But throughout all of this at work, Mr. Cunningham started bullying me even more than before.
You're taking another day off, huh? Who do you think you are?
I'm sorry, I'm going to go see my mother.
Excuse me? What? So you think that your mom's illness is going to magically heal just because you go and see her? If you go and see her, she's going to live a longer life?
When he said that, I was so infuriated that I wanted to punch him on the face right on the spot. However, my colleague who was there overheard the conversation, stepped in. Melissa, you can't worry about what Mr. Cunningham says. Don't let it bother you. It's an employee's right to take paid leave, so you should go ahead and take whatever leave that you need and go see your mother, okay? Yeah, thank you. but I'm really sorry. It's still a fact that every time that I take a day off, it's a burden to everybody else in the team. Trust me, there's not a single person here that thinks of you as a burden to the team. All of us are just as worried about your mother. Mr. Cunningham is the only one that would ever say anything otherwise. In the office, everybody other than my manager was truly wonderful, and they were always really thoughtful of me. I was so grateful for all of their sentiments, and whenever I was back in the office, I did my absolute best to put all into my work and accomplish as much as I could. Days like this continued for about a year, until one day, I finally received the dreaded phone call from my father that my mother had passed away, and my family and I went back to my parents' hometown. My mother ended up living about 3 months longer than the doctor had predicted, and my father truly believed that,
You know, your mom fought hard to keep living because you kept coming here to see her. She was always so happy to see you, Melissa. It was all thanks to you.
With tears in his eyes, he smiled as he said that to me. When I heard my father's words, I was so overwhelmed with sadness, but also happiness at the same time, that I cried my eyes out. After that, my husband and father and I held my mother's funeral. When people found out about her passing, a lot of the neighbors, as well as relatives and people from far away, came to pay their respects to my mother. My father thanked each and every one of those people personally, and I was able to see in the very end just how many people loved my mother from near and far. After that, I said my last farewells to my mother, and my family and I headed back home. The next day, I went back to work. However, to my disbelief, when I arrived at the office, not only was my desk missing, but every single one of my belongings there were also gone. What? Why are all my things missing? What's going on? I stood there in shock and confusion when out of the corner of my eye, I saw Mr. Cunningham walking over to me with a grin on his face.
Oh, are you looking for your stuff? I threw away all of your belongings that were here, because a useless employee like you that takes so many days off of work isn't necessary to this company anyway.
But within those documents was a contract that was going to be signed with one of our biggest clients today.
What?
We're meant to be signing a contract today with a major company, and that's why I left a printed copy out of the confidential contract on my desk, and there's no other copy of it. Where did you put it? This is a contract with $10 million on the line.
I didn't hear about any of this. I don't know what you're talking about.
Mr. Cunningham knew what a big deal was, and when he heard that there was a contract within those materials, he went into a panic. No matter how many times I asked him where he threw it away, all he was saying that it was none of his business, and he was trying to get out of taking any responsibility for what he had done. But then, as the other employees started arriving to the office, and they saw the commotion, they ran over. But when they heard the situation, they all went pale. I'm sure it had been thrown out with the rest of the trash, and now we couldn't possibly know where it would be. I tried to look for a backup of the file, but it seems that Mr. Cunningham had even thrown away my computer into the trash along with the contract. But Mr. Cunningham continued to say,
I have nothing to do with this! This is your own fault for not reporting something that important to your own boss! So you're going to take full responsibility for this! Do you hear me?
As he said that, he ran away. I was so furious with my manager, but I couldn't just sit by and worry about that right now. That was when I remembered that anytime we create a contract, we always have another colleague proofread it for any mistakes or any missing components just in case. I thought that there was a small possibility that the data was left on their computer, so when I contacted them, thankfully, she said that she still had the file. The client was going to be coming to our office first thing in the morning, but I still had a lot of other materials that I needed to print and prepare before they arrived. From there, it was a major rush, and everybody in the office was panicking, but we were somehow able to collect all of the materials together, and I also succeeded in printing out a copy of the contract. And then, after all of that, the client came, and we were able to get the contract signed. All of my colleagues and I let out a big sigh of relief, and we celebrated the success of this contract. However, after that, the CEO arrived at the office just past noon, and as soon as he did, Mr. Cunningham went straight to his office and got up on his high horse.
Thanks to my hard work, we were finally able to sign a contract with a major company. It was a hard road to get here, but I did it.
All of my colleagues and I were furious that it was coming out of his mouth. But then, this was the CEO's response.
You worked hard? Well, that's strange, isn't it? Strange? What do you mean it's strange, sir? Actually, I just received a certain phone call earlier. It was from a contractor saying that they received a request to throw out a massive amount of personal belongings of one of our employees. but that they realized there were computers and important-looking documents in there. So he called to confirm whether he could really get rid of it or not. What? And so, I had my secretary look into it for me. And it turns out that you were the one who gave those orders. And yet, how is it that you were the one who secured the contract?
Never in his wildest dreams could Mr. Cunningham have imagined that the CEO would know about the situation. And he was completely pale as the CEO was speaking. This time, the CEO had turned to the rest of us employees that were there.
I also heard from my secretary that you guys were all working very closely together, and that you managed to secure the contract with the major company as a team. Thank you.
The moment that we heard those words, my colleagues and I were ecstatic and celebrated on the spot. After that, for nearly destroying such a major contract and for throwing away an employee's personal belongings without any permission, Mr. Cunningham was immediately fired from the company. He had to gather his own belongings and leave the office that day. Mr. Cunningham always had it out for me in particular, but it turns out that a lot of other employees had also had negative experiences with Mr. Cunningham, and so everybody celebrated when he was fired from his job. At our company, the previous CEO was brainless, and that's why the current CEO took over. But apparently, Mr. Cunningham was hired by the previous CEO and was sucking up to him. After the current CEO was in charge, apparently he was somehow managing to keep up the good act in front of him. But I'm sure he never could have expected that instead he was going to be fired and removed from the company. But everyone is saying, myself included, that ever since Mr. Cunningham was let go, that it's become a lot easier to work in the company. According to rumors through the grapevine, Mr. Cunningham didn't have any skills to begin with, and he was just smart about how he maneuvered his way around the important people, but that wasn't going to work anymore. He couldn't find a new place to work, and perhaps he ran out of money because somebody said that they saw him in completely run-down clothing at the convenience store, buying leftover food at half price.
How was today's video? If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, like, and leave a comment. Stay tuned for more.